I wanted to just show you a few different ideas about doing vegetables in containers, and thought I'd actually plant a tomato, but I brought some other ones as well. If you're doing a tomato, maybe a pepper wouldn't hurt, but most of the tomatoes you're going to want to use some kind of support. And so this was one of our longer tomato cages. I just cut it where the bottom ring was so it'd be a little bit shorter. Fits nicely into that container. But with tomatoes, peppers, a lot of things in our containers, they do need a little more calcium than a potting mix would have, and a lot of times a little more than what you see in fertilizer. So if I'm doing vegetables, I always like to use a little bit of gypsum in my containers. And gypsum is a calcium sulfate, so we get a little bit of calcium, and then when that sulfur breaks loose, it helps keep the soil a little bit acidified. But if we don't have enough calcium, especially in containers, or even worse, we get blossom end rot, and that is our tomato gets this kind of sunken black part on the bottom. Well, that's a lack of calcium being available, and so by working a little bit of gypsum in, we can kind of help that, reduce that problem. Just like it makes strong bones in people, it helps make strong cell walls in plants. Well, that bottom of that tomato is the oldest part of the tomato, and it tends to break down first. So this is a 14-inch container, probably about the smallest size I would do a tomato in, and just a single plant. But for one that size, and you really can't, I won't say you can't, but with a reasonable application, you can't really burn anything or hurt anything with gypsum. So, I'm probably going to use 1/2 to 3/4 of a cup in that soil, and I could apply that again while it's really fruiting. It doesn't have any fertilizer or anything to it, just that calcium, but I'm going to work that in just a little bit. And then as far as tomatoes go, we do want to make sure we pick a variety that's good for containers. Most of the time you're probably not going to want to do an indeterminate tomato. Indeterminates continue to grow their plant the whole season. A happy, healthy one may be 7 or 8 feet long. A lot of times they're out the cages and going over. That's not going to do well in a container where we're trying to keep the root zone moist. So we want more of the determinants. Some are even more specially for containers. Husky Red is a really nice one, and it's going to be probably a 3-inch tomato. It's not a big tomato, but it's not a little cherry one. But you can tell just even looking at the plant at this size, it's pretty stocky, pretty sturdy. One thing I would do, whether I'm planting in the ground or in the garden, if I go and pick one up like this, and I know it hurts some people, but I would pinch off those first set of flowers that it has. Trust me, it'll make plenty more, but we would rather have it put its energy into the plant for a little while till it gets established. So always do that. There's really nothing wrong with it having a flower. You just don't want it to try to make fruit that small. Burpee has a pretty good line of tomatoes as well. And this one is the bush steak. So, that bush signifying it's going to be that shorter, bushier type. So with one like that, I would just do a single tomato in a pot this size. And tomatoes have the ability, if it seems a little tall and a little loose, you can plant them a little bit deeper. Those little hairs on the stem will become roots. You cannot do that with peppers and other plants, but tomatoes, if we need to go a little bit deeper, we can. So I'm going to poke him in there pretty nicely. And when we're feeding in our containers, especially with vegetables, we usually use a little bit lower numbers when you see the fertilizer for vegetables. This slow release would be fine. It's a 13, 13, 13. If I were to use, our Stutzman's fertilizer, you can grow a great tomato in a container with it. I just probably wouldn't do full strength all the time with it, but I'm going to use a little bit of that slow release and work it around as well into that root zone. And like I said, I cut off this tomato cage, and it turns out it fits just perfectly in here. And so, you know, once the plant's going to be taller than the cage, but it's self-supporting. But what we want is when it's loaded with fruit and all, we don't want it to be able to tip clear over. So something like that's going to provide plenty of support for a patio or container tomato. Doesn't have to just be tomatoes. I've grown these a couple of years in a row and had really pretty good luck with them. They look like the ornamental sweet potato vine, but they make sweet potatoes. Regular eating sweet potatoes. And I've gotten several pounds each year out of my pot from them. And I've, like I said, 2 years in a row now. And there is a yellow-leafed one. Its potato's a little bit lighter. This one with the more fingered or pointed leaf has what I think is the closest to what we all think of as the traditional sweet potato. But those are great in a container where you would use sweet potato anyway. In the fall when you're cleaning it up, dig up the potatoes and enjoy sweet potatoes as well. So that's kind of a neat thing that's been out just a few years. The other thing you can do, this is a cucumber patio snacker, so its little arms are only going to be 2 to 3 foot long. So it may, if you don't put something like this for it to go up, it might go onto the ground, but not a whole lot more. But produces a lot of those smaller, probably best at the 4 to 6 inch length size. But it's a cucumber that is kind of designed to be that small size, small garden or container. And there are even some bush zucchini, summer squashes that are okay for containers as well. So, you know, you don't have to limit yourself to just growing a tomato. And there are cherry tomatoes, Ruby Crush, and there's a couple other ones that have done pretty well in containers as well. So great idea if you just don't have room for a garden or you just want something like that out. Great way to do that.
What is the name of that tomato?
This one is the Burpee Bush Steak. Bush Steak. So, you know, there in your name, you're getting that bush effect again. So a couple of different things to think about with containers. One other one I'm not really going to plant, but I just wanted to show because they've turned out so nicely. Erica does a great job grooming and growing all our succulent bowls. But even if you're doing succulents, you can kind of do that same theory. This kiwi is going to get pretty tall in the container. Then you've got lots of this middle level stuff to kind of fill in. And then we've got the string of pearls and the little pink stem ice plant for your cascading things. So even doing something like succulents, you can get that nice layered, balanced look as well. They like to be crowded together. If you were to count, there's probably 10 different succulents in that little bowl. So kind of a neat idea as well for a container. And then before I let Mike talk to you about some of the other new plants, I wanted to talk just a minute about the firefly petunia. And that is a really neat thing. I've done some research about it as well, and it truly glows in the dark. You know, they will glow brightest if they're somewhere getting good sunshine during the day, direct sunlight. In here, I've taken them in the bathroom, and they do glow, not as brightly as they can because the roof filters out a lot of the spectrum that does that, but they will glow. But what it is, and like I said, it's a totally new plant. It's a white petunia, but when they were trying to breed this thing, like I said, it's called firefly. So originally, they tried to use what fireflies produce to glow, and it didn't work so well with a plant, the animal-plant combination. So they went back to the drawing board. Well, they found some of the mushrooms and fungus that bioluminesce, glow in the dark. And so they were able to extract that gene, that genetic material from them, and incorporate it into the petunia. and so I guess it's a mushratunia or something, but pretty neat plant. It does have a few differences than your traditional petunia. One, they do like the full sun, which all of them do, but they do need to be fed probably even more than regular petunias. They seem to have a much finer root system, so I don't think they're able to take up all of that like some of the other plants. So they need a little bit heavier fertilizing. You know, I would recommend at least once a week using something like this water soluble. That's what we've been growing them with, and that will help keep them green and growing. The other thing, just like petunias, they don't like wet feet, but they are a little bit weaker plants, so we don't want to let them get so dry they completely wilt down. They don't perk back up very quickly from that. But really a neat plant, and I know they have other varieties coming down the line. This was, you know, just out. I mean, it's best invention of 2024. I mean, so it just even was a thing last year. And so last year a few people were able to mail order some, but they really weren't available anywhere. This year they were able to produce enough that a few different independent garden centers were able to acquire some. Assume as things keep going, you know, you'll see them more and more places and more things going on. But just, it's not very often you see something completely different in the plant world. And so, you know, wanted to showcase that and let everybody know about that. And you know, we have a limited quantity of them this year, so if it is something you're interested in, you know, I wouldn't wait too long. But pretty neat plant. So that kind of takes care of what I was going to talk about.
A 6-month screen.